Have you ever looked in the mirror after a major life crisis and just felt like a complete stranger was staring back at you?
Oh, yeah. That is a surprisingly common experience.
Right. Like you recognize the physical mechanics of your face. You see the nose, the eyes, the jawline, but the person operating behind them, well, that person feels entirely new and honestly, maybe even a little unsettling.
That can be terrifying, honestly.
Exactly. You catch yourself, reacting to a situation or making a decision, and this tiny voice in the back of your head whispers, I would never have done that a year ago.
And that's because it is a profoundly disorienting experience.
Mm.
I mean, we rely so heavily on the continuity of our identity just to navigate the world. We wake up assuming we are the exact same person who went to sleep.
Which is a pretty fair assumption on a random Tuesday, right?
Yeah. Right. But when that continuity fractures, whether it's from a sudden massive trauma or just a slow, agonizing period of chronic stress, it feels like the ground simply vanishes beneath our feet.
Hmm.
Because we assume identity is this solid object, like a stone monument. We don't realize it's actually an ongoing active performance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we are jumping into a deep dive today on a piece of fiction that captures this exact psychological terror better than, well, almost any textbook I've ever read.
It really does. It's incredibly accurate.
Yeah, so we're exploring the sci-fi fantasy novel Vitae, The Awakening, and specifically we're tracking the journey of its protagonist, Kurien. But just to be clear, this isn't a book club.
Definitely not.
Right. Our mission today is to decode the supernatural, magical transformations in this book using real-world psychology, neurobiology, and existential philosophy. And there is this haunting quote from Kurien as he's reflecting on this brutal crucible he's enduring that I think just sets the stakes perfectly. He says, I am changing, and I do not know who I will be when this ends.
Wow. Yeah, that line, it captures the absolute terror of the transition phase. Because the fantasy elements in San Vitae, these radical shifts in magical power and physical form, they're actually a flawless mirror for the real science of human identity reconstruction.
It's like the magic is just a metaphor for the biology.
Exactly. And to understand the philosophy of becoming, we first have to dissect the mechanics of unbecoming. Because you cannot build a new psychological structure without completely clearing the debris of the old one. We are talking about the total dismantling of the self under extreme duress.
And the book gives us a brutally visceral look at this dismantling process. So context for you listening, Kurien has been imprisoned and basically tortured for over a decade by this authoritarian regime known as the Santerrie.
A horrific ordeal, just relentless trauma.
Right. Relentless. And through sheer will, he is finally able to heal his broken body using the supernatural life force called Vitae. But then there is this chilling scene right after his physical recovery. He looks into a mirrored surface on the floor, expecting to see his own face, and he just freezes.
The mirror moment.
Yeah. He realizes his eyes are completely, quote, vacant, expressionless, lusterless. And the horror isn't just that he looks tired. The horror is that his eyes look exactly like the soulless eyes of the very people who tortured him for 10 years. He literally feels this cold, calculating indifference rising inside his own mind.
It's a brilliant scene because what Kurien is experiencing is a masterclass in what modern psychology calls identity fluidity, or specifically, the terrifying descent into a self-void.
A self-void. That sounds incredibly bleak.
It is, but it's crucial. See, for a long time, classical psychology operated on the assumption that we possessed a fixed self, like a permanent core personality that might get bruised or battered by life, but fundamentally stays static.
Right, like your core essence never really changes.
Exactly. But modern clinical research completely rejects that idea. When a human being is subjected to prolonged, inescapable harm, the brain doesn't just repress the original personality. It actively dismantles it.
Man, it makes me think of, okay, imagine being trapped in a house during a horrific multi-year blizzard. And to survive, you have to stay warm, obviously.
Right, you need fuel for the fire.
Exactly. So you start tearing down your own drywall, you chop up your family heirlooms, you rip up the floorboards, all just to feed the fire. And you survive the winter. But when the snow finally clears and you step outside, you don't have a house anymore. You just have this charred, empty shell. You literally burned your own structure to stay alive.
That is a perfect analogy. That mechanism of burning the structure, that is the self-void. Kurien's horror in that mirrored surface isn't just that his eyes look dead. It is the devastating realization that the innocent, compassionate person he used to be is genuinely permanently gone.
Because that guy wouldn't have survived the blizzard.
Precisely. That version of him was way too soft to survive the Santerrie. So his brain dismantled it and replaced it with the brutal, indifferent survival mechanisms of his captors. The brain adopts the traits of the aggressor because, well, in a high-threat environment, the aggressor is the one surviving.
I mean, that makes logical sense, but I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
If identity is really that fluid and trauma rewires us so drastically that we literally become mirrors of our own nightmares, does the original self even exist? Or are we all just a walking collection of survival adaptations?
That's the existential dread right there.
Right, because if I am just a meat computer downloading whatever software keeps me from dying, that is incredibly depressing. It strips away all our humanity.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the concept of self-actualization intercepts that exact fear. So psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, they studied how people grow after those internal structures are burned to the ground.
Okay, so after the blizzard.
Right. The naive pre-blizzard self does not return. But self-actualization teaches us that genuine growth doesn't mean building the exact same house again. It requires integrating that dark, survivalist, shattered self into our conscious minds.
Oh, I see. So you don't pretend you didn't burn the house down.
Exactly. Kurien has to accept that this cold indifference, this monster he feels inside him, it kept him alive. It is a tool. The psychological leak here is consciously choosing to hold that tool, rather than letting the tool hold him.
He can't suppress the beast that got him through the winter, but he has to, put it on a leash.
Beautifully put, yes.
Okay, so the psychological house is burned down, the old software is gone, but how does the biological hardware actually build a new self? Because in Santerrie, there is this concept of the sanite, which translates to the reborn.
Right, a really fascinating magic system.
Yeah, and there's a scene where a character named Rikuko explains what a sanite actually is. She clarifies it isn't some learned magical skill, and it's not a spell you memorize from an ancient tome. It is this internal, instinctual isolation.
It's an internal boundary being drawn.
Yeah, she says the mind literally walls itself off from the deteriorating, corrupting effects of ordinary Vitae. And through this profound internal awakening, these sanites gain the ability to heal dying beings with a kiss by drawing on the pure essence of their surroundings rather than draining their own life force.
And that fictional magical isolation maps so perfectly onto the real-world neurobiology of trauma recovery.
Really? How so?
We're talking specifically about the mechanisms of neuroplasticity and prefrontal integration. So when a person is under chronic, severe threat, the amygdala, which is the primitive fear center of the brain, essentially stages a coup.
It just takes over everything.
Completely. It hijacks the nervous system and heavily suppresses the prefrontal cortex, which is the region responsible for rational thought, future planning, and complex identity.
Yeah.
That suppression, that is the corruption of ordinary survival Rikuko is talking about, you are trapped in an endless loop of fight, flight, or freeze.
So the brain is basically just dumping cortisol and adrenaline, screaming, "Don't die today," with absolutely zero bandwidth left for who do I want to be tomorrow.
Precisely. You don't have the luxury of identity, but the biological magic happens the moment a survivor begins to find a pocket of safety, or even just a tiny, tiny sliver of agency.
A break in the storm.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex starts to wrest control back from the fear-driven amygdala. And this isn't just a mood shift, you know. It is a literal structural renovation. The brain utilizes neuroplasticity to physically prune away those hyperreactive fear synapses and grow brand new neural pathways centered around empowerment.
Man, it's like a city rewiring its entire electrical grid while a hurricane is still raging outside.
That's exactly what it is.
The engineers are just frantically rerouting power from the flooded sectors to keep the hospitals running. And the really fascinating part to me is how the brain funds this construction project.
Yes, the dopamine circuits.
Right. As those new pathways of safety and agency begin to form, the brain's dopamine reward circuits recognize the tiny victory, so they secrete dopamine, which acts like a sort of biological mortar, literally cementing that new pathway in place.
It's incredible. The brain literally synthesizes motivation out of despair. So when Rikuko describes the mind isolating itself from corruption, that is the biological equivalent of cortisol levels finally dropping.
The static cleared?
The static clears, the prefrontal cortex comes back online, and the brain can finally begin the labor of synthesizing a new personality out of the ashes.
And, I mean, you don't even need a totalitarian regime or a torture dungeon to see this in action.
Oh, absolutely not. It happens in everyday life.
Right. Just look at anyone who retires from a 30-year corporate career. They wake up on a Monday morning, there's no emails, no title, no subordinates, and suddenly they're wandering on their kitchen at 10 a.m., wondering if they even exist if they aren't, like, Bob the regional manager anymore.
Because the environment changed.
The environment changed, the survival metrics changed, and Bob's brain has to completely rewire its dopamine circuits away from quarterly earnings and toward, I don't know, gardening. Your biology is structurally designed to constantly adapt to the new game.
And that brings up the critical next phase. Biology provides the hardware. The dopamine circuits in the prefrontal cortex, they give you the capacity to rebuild.
A grid is back online.
Right. But biology doesn't dictate your personality. It doesn't choose your values. Once the power grid is up, how do you actually program the new software of you?
Yeah, how do you choose who to become? Let's actually look at a pivotal moment in the book with a character named Sharina. Kurien escapes the Inquisitor vaults with her. She has survived unimaginable horror, and as they flee into these dilapidated ruins, she's wearing a tattered, blood-stained medical gown.
Such a heavy visual.
It is the ultimate, inescapable visual symbol of her victimhood. Every single time she looks down, she is reminded of what was done to her. But then, during a really tense moment, there is this unintentional magical phenomenon, a blood bonding.
Right, his Vitae interacts with her.
Yes, Kurien's Vitae flows into her, and it physically alters her clothing. The magic transforms her medical rags into this striking, empowering black leather armor, because he desperately wants her to see herself as this beautifully powerful creature who is in complete control of her own autonomy.
It is a profound metaphor for psychological reclamation.
See, hold on. I struggle with this scene. I really do.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because he's literally using his supernatural power to change her clothes based on how he perceives her. That feels incredibly patronizing to me. I mean, she just barely escaped a dictator who controlled her every move, and now this guy is playing dress-up with her based on his own fantasy of a strong female warrior.
I see where you're coming from.
Isn't that just replacing one imposed identity with another?
I completely understand the skepticism. And if we view it purely as him forcing an outfit on her, it would be extremely patronizing. But this scene is actually a brilliant allegory for narrative identity theory.
Narrative identity theory. Okay, what is that?
It's the psychological concept that human beings construct meaning entirely through the stories we tell about ourselves. Now, after a traumatic event, survivors almost always internalize what's called a contamination narrative.
A contamination narrative.
Yes, this is the internalized psychological story that they are permanently ruined, broken, and completely defined by what the aggressor did to them. The tattered medical gown is the literal physical manifestation of her contamination narrative.
Oh, wow. So she is physically wearing the story that she is nothing but a victim.
Exactly. And what Kurien is doing is not overriding her identity. He is acting as an external catalyst for her post-traumatic growth. Think of the person's identity like a Wikipedia page, okay?
Okay, tracking with you.
Trauma is like a malicious user going in, deleting all your nuanced biographical data, and replacing the entire page with just the words, "This person is ruined." And when you are trapped in that contamination narrative, you often do not have the mental strength to rewrite the page yourself.
You need editors. You need a support system to, like, lock the page, revert the vandalism, and help you draft a new chapter.
That is exactly it. Kurien is providing the profound social and emotional mirror she desperately needs to reauthor herself. He isn't making her into something she's not.
Because the magic responds to her, right?
Yes. The magic of the Vitae in the book responds to the user's latent potential. He is reflecting her own inherent buried strength back to her when she is too traumatized to access it on her own. And real-world resilience theory hinges on this exact dynamic.
We don't heal in a vacuum.
Never. We co-become through the people who witness our survival, validate our strength, and help us shift our internal storytelling from a contamination narrative to a redemption arc.
Okay, co-becoming. I really like that. The armor takes the shape of her latent strength, not his dictation. It's a shared process of reclaiming agency.
Exactly. It's empowerment, not imposition.
And that concept of agency, I mean, it scales up to some massive, terrifying existential ideas. We've looked at the psychology and the neurobiology, but what about the philosophy of ultimate freedom?
Oh, this is where it gets really deep. When we transition into philosophy, we enter the realm of existential becoming, spearheaded by thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Søren Kierkegaard.
The heavy hitters.
The absolute bedrock of existentialism is the phrase, existence precedes essence. In really simple terms, a table's essence is defined before it even exists. A carpenter draws a blueprint, decides it's going to be a table, and then builds it.
Its purpose is predetermined.
Right. But a human being just exists first, biologically. You're thrown into the world with no blueprint, no fixed destiny, and no permanent definition. You have to create your own essence through the relentless, ongoing accumulation of your choices.
Which is the core conflict for Kurien. I mean, the Santerrie elites, this corrupt ruling council, they treat humans exactly like tables.
They want to define everyone's essence.
They want to define his essence before he even acts. They label him their conscript, their weapon, their executioner. And his entire narrative arc, literally the whole plot of the book, is a violent, active rejection of that predetermined blueprint. He completely refuses to be the monster his circumstances dictate.
And we see this existential battle constantly in the real world. It is incredibly common in individuals who manage to escape high-control environments.
Like extreme religious cults.
Totalitarian regimes, or even just hyper-toxic, all-consuming corporate cultures. But it applies to more common massive life transitions, too. Think about a painful divorce after 20 years of marriage, or surviving a severe, life-altering illness.
Because the structure is gone.
Exactly. When the overarching structure that defined your daily existence collapses, you are thrust into this abyss of existential freedom. You are suddenly forced to construct an identity completely outside of the roles that were imposed on you.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. We deeply romanticize freedom in our culture. We make movies about it, we sing about it, but true, absolute existential freedom.
It is terrifying.
It is paralyzing, because if you don't have a role assigned to you, even if that role was oppressive or painful, you have to take complete, uncompromising responsibility for who you become next.
There's nowhere to hide.
Right. If you build a house you hate, there is no dictator, no spouse, no boss left to blame. It is all entirely on you.
You are describing the absolute burden of Nietzschean becoming.
Nietzsche.
Friedrich Nietzsche argued that true human growth demands the overcoming of inherited constraints. It requires the active destruction of the old inherited values so you can forge your own from scratch. It is arguably the heaviest psychological burden a human can carry because it strips away every single one of your excuses.
It strips away the excuses and it produces this really counterintuitive insight for me. We tend to think that trauma or crisis damages our true self.
Right, that it breaks the core of who we are.
Yeah. But looking at all of this, the biology, the existentialism, it almost feels like a crisis just proves that the solid self was an illusion to begin with.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to phrase it.
Like, the comfortable, static you before the crisis was just a luxury afforded by an environment of safety. The moment the environment breaks, the illusion shatters, and you realize you are just raw material.
That is a profound way to look at it. And if we synthesize all these disciplines, psychology, neurobiology, existentialism, through what's known as process philosophy, we reach that exact conclusion.
Process philosophy, that's Alfred North Whitehead, right?
Yes. Whitehead argued that we fundamentally misinterpret reality. We look at the world and we see nouns, a rock, a tree, a person. But reality is actually made of verbs. It is made of processes.
So I'm not a noun.
No, you aren't a static human. You are an ongoing event of humaning. Identity isn't a destination you arrive at where you just park the car and you're done. It is an endless, unfolding state of becoming. The Kurien we meet in Chapter 1 is biologically and philosophically dead by the final chapter, and neither of them were the final version.
That is so empowering, because it means your past absolutely does not dictate your future self.
Not at all.
Whether you listening are dealing with a minor shift in your daily routine, a devastating career collapse, or a total reimagining of your life, the destruction of your old habits isn't a failure. You aren't broken. That destruction is the strict biological and philosophical requirement for the creation of a new you.
The house has to burn.
The house has to burn so you can use the warmth to survive and use the empty plot of land to build something stronger.
Well, I will leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
If neuroscience proves that your brain is constantly pruning and rewiring its own physical structure based on your environment, and existential philosophy dictates that your identity is nothing but a fluid, ongoing process of choices, then who is the you that is listening to this right now? In the relentless construction of your identity, are you the sculptor holding the chisel, or are you the clay being shaped?
Wow. And, the next time you look in the mirror after a long, hard season and feel like a stranger is staring back, maybe don't be afraid of them. They are just the newest version of the software. Introduce yourself and ask them what they want to build next.